In 1944, the United States Marines and one unit of Army invaded the island of Saipan. Before the island had even been secured, the military was unloading radio equipment onto the island, and a few weeks later, WXLD Saipan went on the air. Today on the 78 RPM channel, a rare and wonderful recording from the Pacific Theater, 1944. Hello, and welcome to the 78 RPM channel. Whether you're new to 78s or an advanced collector, this is your source for information, research, and music about 78 RPM records, cylinders, and radio transcriptions. Hello and welcome to the 78 RPM channel. As I mentioned in the intro, the construction of WXLD radio began within days of the beginning of the invasion, and broadcast equipment was being unloaded while active fire was occurring. This is according to an April 13th, 1945 edition of The Brief, which was a publication of the Army Air Forces in the Pacific Theater. It should be noted that a lot of the equipment intended for WXLD was blown up by a magnetic floating mine before it reached the beach. However, they managed to salvage enough Japanese radio equipment to complete the station. Initially, the station was only 1,000 watts, so it really only reached the island of Saipan and then the neighboring island of Tinian. According to an Army Air Forces newsletter, the plan was to boost the wattage of this station to 100,000 AM watts, which would literally reach the entire Pacific Theater. Now, this apparently didn't happen, but it was boosted to 50,000 watts, which even from Saipan means it would reach all the way to Japan, and it would also reach the western coast of the United States. We know this because at least one California newspaper reported that a lot of people on the West Coast were listening to Radio Saipan. They also mentioned that the talent on WXLD was equal to anything in the continental U.S. during the war. If you read between the lines, what that means is that even when this station was only cranking out 1,000 watts and could really only be heard on two islands, because the plan was to initially go to 50 or 100,000 watts, the military was already moving a lot of talent to WXLD onto the island of Saipan itself. So many of the DJs, the voice talent, the musicians, and the vocalists, both men and women, were actually on the island of Saipan, and those programs and that music was actually recorded on the island. And that's where this disc comes in. This is a WXLD instantaneous 16-inch transcription disc. This was recorded on the island of Saipan. I acquired this record from a Craigslist ad. An elderly gentleman in Alabama put a Craigslist ad that indicated that he had a bunch of sports transcription discs, which of course is right up my alley. So I contacted him and we made the deal and I picked up all the discs. Unbeknownst to me, in the middle of that stack of discs were these recordings from WXLD Saipan. As usual, I have queried archives and collectors about WXLD Saipan content, and I have found exactly one other disc. It is a country music group, and that disc resides, probably appropriately, in the Country Music Hall of Fame. That's the bird. Today we're going to play a program where both the voice talent and the musicians were on Saipan. This is a program called AAA Time, and if you're unfamiliar with military terminology, AAA is shorthand for anti-aircraft artillery. And so it was called AAA Time, and the featured group were called the AAA Downbeats. They were a slightly jazzy big band unit, and they were really talented. The vocal group which will be joining them are called the Grenadiers. Again, a military group being recorded on Saipan. One thing to keep in mind, this disc was recorded when Radio Saipan was still a 1,000 watt station, and it basically at that point just reached Saipan and Tinian. In spite of that fact, all this talent was being funneled to the island in anticipation of it being the hub of a gigantic Pacific network. Now, instead of just playing the disc and watching the needle go from one side of the disc to the other, I'm going to throw in a few visuals, and I do need to give credit to the Southwest Museum of Engineering communication, and computation, as they are the source for a lot of this visual material from WXLD that you're about to see. The one thing you don't need is more of me talking. So let's go to Saipan, August 1944.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. 1815 of a more or less pleasant Saipan evening. And here from the fringe of your favorite neighborhood kilocycle hangs a quarter hour of music by Saipan's own AAA Downbeats. A number one music styled in the AAA manner, with credit for an assist going to 4 young men who call themselves the Grenadiers. Will you listen? A George Hines original hauls the curtain up this evening as one downbeat sets off the AAAs in a thing called Downbeat Stomp. Now, while the smoke clears away, something slow and mellow to match a deeply sentimental mood in a AAA review of the same old question. The words to match the Duke Ellington music are, "Don't you know I care?"
After 2 tunes by the AAA Downbeats, we're joined by the Grenadiers.
And there's that familiar bit of harmony which serves to introduce 4 young men who call themselves the Grenadiers, here to furnish their accustomed bit of vocal divertisement this evening on AAA Time. The first of 2 spirituals by the boys is the Saipan special for the week, Didn't It Rain?
Didn't it rain, children? God's gonna send his water from Zion. He gonna raise heaven up higher. It's gonna rain, it's gonna rain. Well, it rained 40 days without a stopping. Rain so hard till the rain kept dropping. Now when you get to heaven, gonna put on my shoe, gonna walk all in heaven. So then you better didn't it? Hey, children, God's gonna send his water from Zion. He gonna raise his heaven up higher. It's gonna rain.
And what's this next, anyhow?
Well, anyhow, just anyhow, oh my Lord, down at Deco Saipan, I'm on my way to heaven anyhow, where you can do me, where you can scan me, where you can scan a line, my Lord, down at Deco Saipan, I'm on my way to heaven anyhow.
That's a pretty good group, and I can only imagine that some of the members went on to gospel or doo-wop careers in the late 40s and early 50s. One other thing I need to point out is because these were military groups, they tended not to give a lot of credit to individual artists. In fact, I do not know any of the artists that are performing on this disc. So if you have any idea who the AAA Downbeats were or who the Grenadiers were, please let me know. They were really, really good musicians. And again, obviously some of these guys went on to make records in the late 40s and 50s, but as of now, I don't know who they are. As we wrap things up, I'm going to let the announcer himself take you out. And I want to leave you with a little bit of information before we do. The announcer is going to identify himself as Ed Reimers. Now, if that name rings a bell, first of all, you are an extreme nerd. But Ed Reimers was Admiral Fitzpatrick on Star Trek. He is probably most well known for the Trouble with Tribbles episode. If you don't remember that, you might remember him as being the voice that says, "You're in good hands with Allstate." He was also the voice that you heard at the beginning of the TV show Maverick, and I'm going to let him take you out. In the meantime, enjoy the remainder of this broadcast, and thank you for joining me on the 78 RPM channel. We'll see you next time.
And that, as it is said, is that. For this time at least, we'll bid a fond farewell to this fine musical organization we know as the AAA Downbeats, not to mention our 4 Grenadiers. Comes next Wednesday at the same time, we'll be dropping your way again, so leave the latch string out at about the same spot on your radio dial. That we includes the Downbeats, the Grenadiers, and your announcer, Ed Reimers. This is AFRS, the Armed Forces Radio Service.